Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your love. So a number of years ago, I think I was still in seminary, and it was right after Jeff Lee had become our bishop. I went to my niece's confirmation out, I don't know, one of the East Coast churches on the lake. And I think I was in Highland Park. And anyway, Jeff talked to the kids in the confirmation class, and he told them a story about this family that he knew, and whenever the kids went out, the parents would say, "Remember your Ericksons," or whatever the family name was. And he talked about how that changes how we go through life, is how we're known. And when he closed with the kids, he looked at them and he said, "Remember you're Christians." And of course that is a big thing about today's gospel. I mean, this is one of the moments where Peter really shines, and then he crashes and burns a few verses later. He gets it right when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And he says, "You are the Messiah." And he gets it. But then when Jesus starts telling them about the things he's going to have to go through, Peter's like, no, that's not going to happen. He's rebuking Jesus, and Jesus is like, "Get behind me, Satan." And so we see him really getting it for a moment and then not getting it. And I guess that's life. I mean, we're not losing our lives over it here like in other places. I mean, in some places in the world, it's deadly costly to be a Christian. People get killed for being a Christian in other parts of the world. We don't have to worry about that. We can freely claim to belong to Jesus, and we can live our lives in a way that shows that. And do we? I love, somewhere along the line, someone raised the question, like, if you were to be on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Yeah, it does. Is there enough evidence to convict us? Are we living our lives in such a way that people see Jesus, see God's love shining through us? Because who we are, it makes a difference. And whose we are, it makes a difference. We belong to Jesus. And Jesus required certain things of us. When we go through our baptismal covenant, we make some promises about how we're going to live our life and who we believe in, and identifying as a beloved child of God. And then what do we do with that? Does it make a difference? Hopefully, yes. Hopefully we come to this table to be fed. And as it says, and we're using Eucharistic C for a little while now, as it says, we come to this table not for solace only, but for strength, not for pardon only, but for renewal. And let the grace of this Holy Communion fill us and change us. What we do at this table matters because it feeds us for the work that we have to do out in the world. And it's a world that needs a lot of help. It's a world that needs a lot of love, that needs a lot of hope. There's so much brokenness in the world. You do not have to look hard to find it. Turn on the news, read a newspaper, look on Facebook. It's like you'll just be barraged by all the evil in the world. And yet, there's goodness, and there's good stories. And right now, they're getting pummeled by that storm out east, and a tree fell on a house and killed a mother and a baby. I mean, last I heard there were 11 deaths. I don't know if the count has gone up since I listened to the news. But it's troubling times. We can reach out and offer help to those people. There's a thing in your bulletin with a slip for the ERD. You can make a donation directly to the Episcopal Youth and Development. They'll be on the ground there helping. That's what the church should be doing. We should be helping wherever help is needed. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, seeing that people that need housing get it. When I was driving down this morning, I saw a guy on a bike, and it was a little early, and it didn't look like he was out for exercise. It looked like he lived on his bike. He had one of those little trailers, behind it that parents put kids in sometimes. His was filled with bags and clothes. And I'm like, that's probably all he has in the world. People right here in America living with so little when we have so much. And even if we're on the lower end of the middle class, we're still doing pretty well here. How can we use the resources we have? That's why we bring food every month to take over the crisis center. We want to make a difference. When I've heard the statistics that 1 in 4 kids in Elgin is going to bed hungry, I just want to scream. It's like, we shouldn't be like that. And we can make a difference. And because of who we are and who we belong to, we ought to be making a difference. We don't come here just for ourselves, because, I mean, it's nice. It's a great community. People love you, hug on you. It's a warm and friendly place to be. But if we don't get fed at this table and be changed somehow by it to go out into the world and do good works, we're missing half the point of why we're here. And I was reading some of the commentary, and this is by Carolyn Lewis, who is a Lutheran pastor, and she was talking about, when Jesus, he didn't just ask, who do you say I am? He's at the same time, like Kay had said to me, who will you say that you are? That's the rub of the question and the heart of its difficulty. If we only had to provide an answer to Jesus' question of his identity, that would be one thing. However, answering the question of Jesus' identity is also having to give voice to our own. Who you say Jesus is who you have decided to be. You can't answer Jesus' inquiry without revealing who you are. Or we could switch it around. Who you are reveals who you have decided Jesus to be. Jesus' question is not a test. It's not about getting the answer right. It's the moment when you come face to face with your own commitment, your own discipleship, your own identity. It's the moment when you have to admit to what extent how you follow Jesus actually connects with some sort of confession of who you believe Jesus to be. Have you noticed there's not a lot of correlation these days between claims about Jesus and choices of how lives are lived? Whether that be individuals, churches, or institutions of the church. But who do you say I am is not just an issue of integrity or an evasion of hypocrisy. It's being willing to risk being known for what you believe. It's recognizing that your identity cannot be separated from your Christology. Peter has to answer the question, as do every single one of Jesus' disciples, for himself, and so too do we. In the end, who do you say I am is an invitation to meaningful Christological reflection, an invitation to conversation around Christological commitments that is all too rare these days, an invitation to discussion around the correlation between who we are and who we need Jesus to be. And one more reiteration, who do you say that I am, is also a question that we should ask of others, of ourselves. Who indeed do people say we are? Are we willing to ask the question, or do we stay silent, afraid of what people might say, perhaps worried about what truth might get uttered, avoiding the question altogether so as to feign a kind of confidence we don't really have? Jesus knows it's one of the hardest questions to ask, which is why he asked it in the first place, and why he has to ask it first. And I remember years ago when Kay posed that question to me, who do you say you are? My first answer was somebody's friend. It was like, it was the beginning of my recognition, I think, of my codependency, which I shared a little bit about last week. But it's like, we have to get to the nitty-gritty of who we are. If we want to live life as the fullness of who God created us to be, we have to own what we are. And we're gifted, and we're flawed, and we're messy, and we're complicated, and we're wonderful. We're made in God's image. It's a glorious thing. When you see a new baby come into the world, you know God has not given up hope for this world. He keeps sending us. He keeps sending more of us. I want to live in a world and create a world where little babies like we have around here have a safe place to grow up, where they'll be fed and clothed, and they won't be like a guy riding around on a bike with a trailer, little tiny trailer full of all his possessions. That's not the world I want to live in. That's not a world that reflects Jesus' love. That's a world that's broken. That's a world that God calls on us to fix. What did Jesus say? Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, take care of the widows and orphans. This is our work. This is why we come to this table, to be fed, to go out and do the work that God has given us to do. That confirmation I was at wasn't my first introduction to Jeff, but it might have been the first time I heard him preach. And I remember it all these years later because he was so convicted about who we are. And he looked at those young people and he said, remember, you are Christians. I can look at you today and say, remember, you are Christians. And you might say, so what? Then I say to you, how does it make a difference in how you live your life? How does it change how I live mine? Amen.